Now we're going to move on to the home's electrical components, including the electric panel, receptacles, and light switches.
If the distribution panel is inside the property, pull off the panel cover and look for the grounds and ends of the primaries. The copper should be bright and shiny. If the grounds were exposed to weather at the time of installation, or the panel is in the garage, they could look darker and aged. The tips of the primaries would had to have been stripped at the time of install, so they would be shiny if inside the property and relatively fresh looking. Is there evidence of soot on any exposed copper lines? Check the horizontal lines going into the bus bar also. Do they show soot? Find safe ground wires to touch and check for soot. If the soot is not obvious but shows up on your finger or another object used to wipe it, such as a swab, take a picture of the lines with your finger or that object to show evidence of residue. Please be careful when dealing with the panel and make sure you know what is safe to touch and what is not.
When looking at the receptacles and the switches, we focus more on the receptacles because the gases are heavier than air and the soot buildup tends to be more on the receptacles. However, we have seen cases where the tainted Chinese drywall was on the upper portion of the wall, and the blocking, burring, and insulation in the wall prevented the gas movement within the wall cavity, which prevented the buildup on the receptacles and only showed up on the switches.
Remove the receptacle or switch cover plate. If there is paint or wallpaper around the box, be courteous to the property owner and use a sheetrock or razor knife to cut around the cover plate so that you do not inadvertently peel the paint or tear the wall covering. Be sure to make a note if you have to do this and if there were any signs that the cover was recently removed, as well as the cleanliness of the ground wire. The copper could have been cleaned to avoid detection in a real estate transaction. Pull off the cover plate and pull out the receptacle or switch to check the ground wire for soot, and then photograph it. Unless a tablet with report software is utilized to link information with the pictures, use a post-it note in the picture with description of location to avoid any mix-ups with the photos. Even if it is obvious at this point that the property does have tainted Chinese drywall, still check and note all rooms and receptacles. The tainted Chinese drywall might not be throughout the property, and some rooms might not be as impacted. Be particularly sensitive to checking in children's rooms and bedrooms if someone reports allergy symptoms or headaches. The opposite could be happening where there might only be small amounts in the property, but it might be in one room and the only indicator might be light soot in a few receptacles. By the end of the inspection, it should be clear which areas of the property have tainted walls and if ceilings are tainted. It's good to see the type of drywall on the interior ceiling even though there may be a mix. Tainted drywall could be mixed but is usually confined to certain areas of the property, so checking one receptacle or switch per room usually is enough to get an overview. However, if there are any suspect signs or inconsistencies, then additional switches and receptacles may be needed. By the time you are complete, you should be able to draw conclusions as to the areas of the property affected. This is the additional value of the report, so the client has a rough understanding of extent of the tainted drywall. It is not intended to outline precisely where it is, but to provide general areas that are affected.
When working your way through the home, take special notice to the various metal components throughout the home, including faucets, light fixtures, silverware, jewelry, furniture knobs, door stops, toilet paper holders. Those types of things can show the corrosive effects, although they are secondary. They may not be showing up in a tainted home, but it's important to make special note of those items as you see along the way. Low voltage equipment is also susceptible to damage due to the soot that builds up on the copper.
If accessible, check the fire alarm or security system boxes and panels to look at the wires on the plug and transformer and any copper connections. Is there any soot? Has the homeowner had to have repair on them, or are they intermittent and working? The center copper wire will blacken in coaxial cables. They may not show up much if connected. Electronics such as televisions and hard drives and computers have been known to need early replacement, also due to damage from soot. Microwaves have been known to have problems with their displays and controls. The soot might be impacting the conductors or creating shorts and making the devices intermittent and working.
The copper water lines at the water heater and gas lines are two other items to inspect while working your way through the home. Make special note whether they are located in a conditioned space or in the garage. We typically do not recommend lab testing of drywall samples. It's destructive and unnecessary and a wasted expense. The visual inspection protocols establish the evidence necessary to properly document the presence of tainted Chinese drywall. However, if it is requested by the client, it's important to do it properly per the lab's procedures and to be courteous to the client by maybe taking the sample from behind the couch and at another inconspicuous place. Labs typically require a 2-inch by 2-inch sample wrapped in tinfoil, placed in a Ziploc bag, and there are certain protocols that are established in order to ship that to the lab. Please refer to the lab for further details.
Typically, there is different drywall in garages, either 5/8 inch, fire resistant, or humidity resistant type. The specs for NOF actually state that it is not to be installed in humid conditions. Look around the garage for any items that would be affected by tainted drywall, mainly copper components. Here is a list of the items to inspect if in the garage. Copper fittings and pipe at the water heater, air conditioner refrigerant line, electrical panel ground wires, garage door opener control wires, receptacles and switches. Copper will turn dark naturally in humid conditions, so it is important to know the differences. Access the attic through the ceiling access opening. Although ceilings are typically 5/8 inch UL fire rated and not 1/2 inch, some homes have the 1/2 inch tainted drywall on the ceilings. It is important to note that you cannot simply look at the ceiling around the access and assume that it is indicative of the whole ceiling and or the interior ceiling, but it does indicate a certain level of probability. Chinese drywall screening has seen a case of mixed 5/8 inch domestic drywall and 1/2 inch tainted Chinese drywall on the same ceiling. Refer to the drywall manufacturer picture guide in your workbook to help determine the manufacturer of the ceiling board. Look around the attic to see if there are any signs that different drywall was used throughout the ceiling and take note. Take a picture of the stamp on the back of the drywall. Some don't have a stamp or it is very faint. It may be difficult to find.